of Directors, Dan O'Lewin.
Well, hello, everyone. As was just mentioned, my name's Dan O'Lewin. I'm the chair of the club this year, and I'm also a corporate VP at Microsoft, living and working here in Silicon Valley. Welcome to tonight's event. We are really privileged tonight. This is going to be a nice, intimate conversation between Dr. Jim Goodnight, co-founder, CEO of SAS, and Rich Karlgaard, publisher of Forbes. Thank you for joining us tonight. Before we begin with the introductions, I'd like to make a few announcements on behalf of the club. First and foremost, the next program is called The Laws of Disruption at the Accident-Prone Intersection of Innovation and Law. I happen to be particularly fond of this topic. Larry Downs, who's the author, he's with the Bell Mason Group, he's the author of this book. The program will be held, it's a breakfast on November 19th. It's a fascinating topic in terms of the pace of innovation and the relative lack of maintenance of pace of law and other things in the general system within which we work. So I think you'll find that a nice breakfast program. The next program after that is the 7th annual very popular Gadgets program with Walt Mossberg of the Wall Street Journal and All Things D. And he'll have with him Kara Swisher, his partner at the D conference, and also gadget guru Greg Harper. And this year, the celebrity guest geek will be Sheryl Sandberg, the COO from Facebook. So please join us at that program. It'll be held on December 3rd right here. There are other programs evolving, also one that's very timely given the pace of M&A in the Valley and in general in the industry. On December 8th, there'll be an M&A program, and there'll be more details about that at the Churchill Club website if you take a look there at churchillclub.org. If you haven't become a member of the club, please consider that. You can find all those details also at the club website. Before we begin, once again, let me thank the sponsors for the program this evening, both the HP Business Intelligence Solutions Group and SAS Institute. Thanks so much. Anyone who is following the program and wishes to tweet along, you can go to pound or hashtag Churchill Club, and you can follow along and send your notes along. So let me begin by introducing Rich Karlgaard, who's the publisher of Forbes, one of the nation's oldest business magazines, founded in fact about 92 years ago. In his Digital Rules column, Rich writes about technology, entrepreneurship, regional economic development, and the future of business and work, and he offers some particularly insightful comments from my point of view. He's a lecturer. He's involved with Fox News Channel, Forbes on Fox, and he sits on a couple of startup boards, one that's really early stage, raising money, and one that's ongoing and $160 million in revenue and profitable. So we would call that a going concern as opposed to a startup. Before joining Forbes, Rich, together with Tony Perkins, co-founded the Churchill Club. So we're really glad to have him back tonight. 6,500 members strong. The club was started in 1985. And for that act, Tony and Rich were co-awarded the Ernst & Young Northern California Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And of late, just for fun, I'll comment that Rich has become an avid cyclist, and he has a goal, which we'll all cheer him on to meet, which is to break 22 minutes going up the old La Honda Road ride, which is the benchmark here in the Valley. Good luck. Typical riders take 30 to 40 minutes, I'm told. On the other hand, I drive it much faster than both. So Rich, good luck, and I'd like to turn the program over to you and Dr. Goodnight. Thanks so much for coming tonight, both of you.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, 20 minutes is the real benchmark of great cyclists, but I'll take 22. What a privilege to be on stage with Jim Goodnight. You know, as we look at this economic downturn, it's been brutal, and it kind of takes the shape of the 73 and 74 stock market crash. Stocks fell 48% then. The major indexes fell 52% from November 2007 to March 2009 this time. Stocks rallied 62% in 75 and 76. They've rallied 65% from the March low. Everything happens faster today. But when you look at the 70s, they were kind of a miserable decade. Stocks went down over the course of the decade, 25%. Inflation wrecked the recovery in the late 70s. pretty miserable, not as bad as the 1930s, but pretty miserable. The saving grace were all these great companies that were started in the 1970s. It might have been the greatest decade of the 20th century in terms of companies that were started that are still powerful industry leaders today. Think about it. FedEx was started in 1970. Southwest Airlines, 1971. Daniel's company, Microsoft, 1975. 1976, what a banner year. Apple, Genentech, and SAS. 1977, Oracle. Charles Schwab started discount brokerage in the 1970s. Silicon Valley style venture capital got going in the 1970s. Intel released the microprocessor, probably the most important single invention of the last 50 years, in 1971. So it's an interesting time. And one of the things I'd like to start our conversation with, Jim, is how you started SAS. You were a PhD, working on your PhD, or had it. Were you an accidental entrepreneur like Gordon Moore calls himself, or did you have the idea of starting a company long before you came upon the idea of SAS?
Well, not about starting a company, but about the fact that we really enjoyed being programmers, and we loved developing software that other people were going to use. And I also enjoyed the fact that it was paying my way through college. So that's how SAS got started back in the 66, 67 time period. That we made our, and this was, I was working on my master's and PhD degrees at NC State. And a fellow named Jim Barr came up with some of the basic design for the underlying structure, and I developed a lot of the applications that sat on top of it. But we announced and had developed and provided documentation for our very first SAS system in 1968.
68, but you started as a company in 76.
76, yeah. That's we were being funded. I think a lot of the university data centers and all the computation that were going on at university was being funded by NIH at the time. And then when Nixon came in, he said he wanted to quit that and only fund NIH to fund the university that had a medical program associated with them. So we were sort of on our own, and so for the next 4 years, we were on what's called soft money. That is, you're welcome to stay at the university provided you can pay your own salary. And so we actually did that.
So your entrepreneurial efforts then were writing grants.
Well, the first group of our users were actually the Southern Experiment Stations that had adopted SAS all over the South to analyze all the agricultural data. So we went to them and we had this funding situation and asked them each to chip in some money, and they said, well, we'll support you for a few years, but you've got to start selling SAS to other organizations so that you can make your own way. So after about 4 years, we had a user group meeting that one of our users had called down in Florida, and we had 350 people there. And we came back from that with, I guess, pretty lofty ideas about, boy, we ought to get out of the university and get out on our own, since we're already paying our salaries anyway, let's just move across the street. So we were able to come up with a deal with the university to let us move across and carry the intellectual property with us.
And now, all these years later, your revenue level is at $2.25 billion?
Yep, about that. Yeah.
And what are you seeing in this economic environment?
It's a little slower. Because we've been bucking a strong dollar all year up until about the 1st of October. We started, the dollar finally got weaker than the euro, or weaker than where it was a year ago. So I think the rest of this year, and I think this is probably true for any companies that are doing more business overseas, they're going to have a very good fourth quarter because of the dollar exchange rate. It's around $1.48, $1.50 right now. Last year it was $1.25 to the euro, so we're going to be getting almost 20% more in. Even if our sales are flat, we'll be getting 20% more in this last quarter because of the weakness of the dollar.
Now, one of the things that your SAS is famous for is its corporate culture. I think that many of us read about you and read about your 4% turnover, read about your beautiful corporate campus in Cary. And it kind of reminds some of us who know the history of Silicon Valley about Hewlett-Packard in its benevolent days under Dave and Bill in the 50s and 60s. You yourself kind of cast this figure like David Packard. I want to talk about how did you settle on that idea as a philosophy, and how does an idea like that stand up during a tough economic time?
Well, I think the idea comes from the fact that we were one of the very first knowledge companies that started back in '76. When we first left, the four of us that left were all owners, so it made a lot of sense that we should let the company pay for soft drinks and Cokes and things like that. And as we began to add more employees, we just continued those kind of practices. But knowledge people, everything that we create at SAS comes out of people's minds. There's not really much manufacturing at all. I mean, right now there's almost no manufacturing because we try to electronically distribute everything. So it's all what they have in their heads. And you have to have an environment that encourages people to have to be creative. So we try to have really, private offices for everybody, none of these cubicle things, so that, if you're in there watching porno, you've got your privacy, that sort of thing. And I think it leads to more creativity to do that. Now, of course, once you put everybody in their own private offices, then you end up with a lot of blank halls. Solution, put art on it. So we have, I think, there's almost 6,000 pieces of corporate art now around the world, because we believe that the art adds to the creative juices that are flowing in people.
How many of you ever have been to the SAS campus in Cary? It's literally like a top-shelf country club, and you now have a hotel on campus that is the equivalent of a Four Seasons. I mean, it's just an amazing sweep of green rolling hills and trees and 50-meter swimming pools and
we just try to do what we heard went on out here.
Well, I think you heard wrong. Well, okay, another thing on corporate culture. Some companies, I think, Google has a lot of amenities for people, but the culture out here is that people work pretty long hours. One of the things you're sort of out of step on in terms of other software cultures is that your people don't work terribly long hours. In fact, you kind of encourage them not to work more than 40 or 45 hours a week. Is that still true?
Well, the standard is 35 hours a week. It always has been.
You can hear the gasps in the crowd.
Well, I've done a lot of programming myself, and on numerous occasions did stay late at night and discovered the next morning that, God, this is terrible code. You had to throw it all away anyway. So I think after about 7 hours, 8 hours of coding, your stuff is starting to turn into mush, and it's really you're just wasting. You're wasting time that night, but then you're going to waste more time the next morning correcting it. So let's just quit after 7 or 8 hours. Go rest. Be with your family. I think the family, the work and the family balance it's got to be balanced. I mean, I've read of these garage operations out here that 80-hour weeks are expected, and I just don't believe in it.
Well, can you have that and still have a meritocracy within the company?
Well, people move up in salary and position based on merit, and those that just are a total failure in their job, they usually will apply for another job in some other department very quickly. So, well, if you're in trouble here, you want to get out of here. So we let people move around from job to job.
You have a no layoff policy. I want to hear how that sort of played out, how that plays out during tougher economic times. Well, first of all, how long have you had a no layoff policy in place?
Oh, we've always had that in place.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you can't get fired.
Yeah.
I mean, you show up and do nothing for long enough, you're going to be found out.
Yeah.
So, but you know, back in January of this year, that people were just, I don't know, almost distracted because they were concerned about what's the future going to be like. So I did a worldwide webcast, and I said that we would not have any layoffs at SAS this year. And that was worldwide. I did ask everybody to quit hiring. Let's don't hire any more people. We have enough on staff right now. And also no raises this year. So that was the policy that we adopted. People started cutting costs left and right, all on their own. Our costs are down 6 or 7% this year over last, and we haven't really tried to do anything except ask people to try to save money. So it's amazing when you get the people at the bottom up, you know, working on those kind of problems.
One of the most famous, the two most famous CEOs of the 1990s were probably Andy Grove and Jack Welch. And Jack Welch made it a regular practice to trim the bottom percent of his workforce every year.
Well, he said that in his book. I don't know that I've ever believed that.
Why not?
Well, I think if it were clearly known that you're going to trim 10%, you'd have a lot of people that would be quite demoralized and leave. I just don't think you can run a company and trim 10% a year. Think of all the money you're spending on lost productivity, on recruiting, and just the disruption of the job. I don't believe you can possibly lay off 10% or terminate 10% a year.
So what do you do with the people who were either mistakes that you hired and made a mistake, or B, somebody who put out for 2 or 3 years, worked very hard, got entrenched, and has kind of gone to sleep?
Well, the people like that, you have to speak to them. We have usually what we call a step-up plan, where they're given, here, take this money, or you've got 90 days to improve. And at the end of 90 days, if you're not improved, you're going to be out of here. So we do that. I think probably about 1.5% to 2% of our yearly employee turnover is non-voluntary. This is something that we have chosen.
And your voluntary turnover is just extraordinarily low, particularly in your industry, the software industry. It's last time I checked, it was running at around 4%, maybe probably less in the downturn.
Well, total is 4%. We hadn't had many people leave this year.
But that's a number that held up even in the go-go late 90s, right?
Yeah. We had a few leave during the dot-com, but it was about 6 in all, and 5 of them came back right afterwards. They discovered how cold it was out there in the real world. Now, some of our older people say, it is so wrong for these young kids to come in and work this is their first job. Everybody ought to be required to work somewhere else first before they can come here. Then they would really appreciate it.
Well, in your path from startup to $2.25 billion in revenue, what were some of the big milestones where fundamentally the company changed?
Well, I guess I look back in the mid or early 80s when our customers were asking us to run. We started out only with the big IBM hardware, and then our own customers began asking us to start supporting some of the mini computers like Digital and what were the names of all those others?
Wang, Data General.
Yeah, Data General. Yeah.
How quickly they came and
they
went.
did. You forget their names. And then, of course, when the PC came out, people wanted us to run on this little 16-bit piece of crap. Sorry about that, Mike. Well, it's hard to do computations in 16 bits. I mean, there's not a lot of room there to operate with your integers, only 16 bits long, and your addresses and all that. So it's really hard. So, but we actually did shoehorn all of SAS into that 16-bit operating system. So. But then, and what we did when that came along is decide, well, if we're going to support a multitude of platforms, we have got to come up with a methodology that will allow us not to have to rewrite software over and over again and make modifications for every single platform. So we came up with what we call our multi-vendor architecture, which was essentially a very thin little operating system that sits on top of everybody else's operating system, so that everything above that layer can talk to just that our own operating system layer. And almost a lot of that stuff, it just passes straight on down through the operating system. We'll generally would develop that in either C or assembly language for that particular piece of hardware to get the maximum speed out of it. So I think that was a real turning point, because it allowed us to really be a lot more productive in what we were doing, and at the same time produce code for all of the major operating systems, Unix, everything at the time.
How did you and your three fellow founders divvy up the tasks in the early days?
Well, three of us were programmers and one was a documentation person. So we stayed pretty busy. We'd stop and answer the phone when it rang when somebody wanted to buy software. We had no outgoing marketing. We just waited for the phone to ring. So it was pretty good in the early days.
When did it become apparent that you were the guy that was going to run the organization?
Well, that was part of the original deal. Yeah. Part of the founding concept.
What milestones have you personally hit then, from 0 to $2.25 billion? Where have you had to change your game as a CEO?
I don't know that I really have, Rich. I don't. You know, we've added just one or two people at a time. We've only built one new building at a time, although we're building two new ones right now at a time. So it's just been a long, slow continuum. You know, we've had very slow, steady growth, around 15% a year has been our average. I mean, during the early days, yeah, it was 100% for 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row, but it's just been slow, steady growth.
One of the things did you ever take outside capital?
No.
Ever have any?
Well, we did borrow money for our very first building, but
Yeah.
that's the last time we ever borrowed money.
Ever have any cash crunches where you thought you'd have to?
No, we have over $1 billion in the bank right now.
Yeah. One of the things that sets you apart, I mean, so many things set you apart from particularly Silicon Valley's concept of a software company. You're not dog-eat-dog culture, as some companies that shall go unnamed are. You have low turnover rate compared to software companies around here, but probably the thing that most sets you apart is that you're privately held. Describe the thinking there. And then I'll share an anecdote about that. But
well, you know, most public CEOs that I've talked to would say they would love to be private. They hate being public.
Then why are so many?
Well, I think at the time, you know, long before all the government restrictions and Sarbanes-Oxley and all the other things, it was probably more prestigious to be a public company. But,
so you never bought into that idea that an IPO would be a marketing event?
No, that would have required a lot of my time to be out on the road and talking to investors. Well, we just have never needed the money. We have always, we've been profitable every year. We will be profitable this year, although it's going to be down 3 or 4% from last year, but last year was our most profitable year we ever had. So what? You know, I can say, okay, look, I have no problem if our profits go down, you know, 3 or 4%. So what? We're still making a lot of money this year. Why should I go lay off 3,000 people just so I can claim that our profits went up? But if you're a public company and you got a bunch of 28-year-old kids on Wall Street telling you what you ought to earn to the penny, you somehow feel pressure to do that. Well, I'm not going to listen to a bunch of 28-year-old kids on Wall Street. I mean, look where they got their own damn companies. My God, they bankrupted them all. The governments had to bail them all out. Why are you guys letting these people tell you how to run your companies? Yeah, crazy.
The anecdote I was going to share is very similar to that. It was I think I first visited you on your campus in 1999, and every other call you were getting into your office was an investment banker.
Yeah, you said you drew the short straw and that you had to come see me.
I did. It was just a short straw. And for an hour I sat in his office and asked him questions, and he'd say, yep, or nope. You made me sweat that meeting. It was about 104 out in that day in Cary, and that's a humid 104, by the way. But and the investment bankers were calling all the time, and you said something similar. I was noting this great corporate campus of yours in the 50-meter swimming pool, and you said, yeah. He says they're praising you to the moon today. The first time you missed your number, some 28-year-old, and you didn't say kid. It was.
Well, 28-year-old is a kid to me now.
Yeah, it was. It was a different word. It was a. It had 4 letters instead of 3, and you said the first time I missed my numbers, that 28-year-old bleep, is going to tell me I can't have my 50-meter swimming pool. But you said then you toyed with them, and they were calling. You knew very well how much, what percentage an investment bank would want for doing a deal. 7% was typical at the time, and you said you told one of them, well, how about 0.7%? And then they amazingly didn't come back.
Well, Warren Buffett doesn't pay 7%. He's way down there in that 1 or 2% range.
What do you make of all the changes going on in hardware infrastructure today? What do you make of cloud computing?
Well, we had time sharing back in 64, 65. And I mean, other than the fact they've got a virtualized operating system, what the hell is different? It's the same thing. You're going to use somebody else's hardware, and you're going to upload whatever operating system and solution you want to up to it. It's time sharing. I'm sorry. It's a big server farm with a virtual operating system. That's all it is.
Yeah.
I heard so many people, oh, God, I can't wait till the cloud computing gets here. It's going to solve all of our problems. We'll be able to find all the answers we need right there. I'm thinking, I'm sorry, you got this picture wrong. You're not going to find any solution up there unless you put it up there yourself. I know y'all are counting on cloud computing. I wish you all luck. I'm not going to lose 30% overhead on virtualizing my systems, though. They're going to run straight operating system.
Well, how do you? Okay. What happens the day though that you're funny, you're confident, but so were a lot of companies. IBM was confident in the late 80s and almost went bankrupt in 1992. The mini computer industry that we mentioned was riding high. Tracy Kidder wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called The Soul of a New Machine on the rise of data general, and then they all just went. What they missed was what they all missed. IBM recovered from, but the mini computer industry did not. Was a disruption. I mean, how do you keep an eye out on? It seems to me the potential flip side of this wonderfully benevolent culture you have is that it could become insular, and it could miss some big disruptive event in your industry, some equivalent of a Salesforce.com coming into your industry and changing the rules. How do you look out for that stuff?
Well, we have a few tricks up our own sleeves in that area. We're doing some amazing stuff with grids right now, trying to break out some of these large risk problems and some of the retail optimization problems that are taking 12 hours or more, and we're trying to get the time down to 10 to 15 minutes. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us here in working in this area, that we have a lot of expertise in this area. So I mean, that itself might become somewhat disruptive.
And you spend what percentage of your revenue on R&D?
About 22%. So that's because I'm an R&D person myself, and I like R&D, and I've been doing some work on this grid stuff myself because it's really exciting stuff. I mean, to turn on 1,600 CPUs, cores, and make them all go at the same time, that's a lot of fun.
So you do like the cloud.
Hey, if you like virtual operating systems, fine.
You like the hardware part of the cloud. Yeah. Let's switch gears before we go to audience questions. Talk about the U.S. economy. And you spent a lot of time in Washington. You were just in Washington on Monday.
That was like yesterday.
Yeah, that was yesterday. Are you? We've always been able to come out of these recessions, even the more painful ones, better than before. And it's usually technology and innovation that leads us out. Are you confident that will happen this time?
I don't know that I am, Rich. We have been seeing for the last 10, 12 years more and more of the creativity and innovation is moving to Asia, specifically China and India and Singapore and South Korea. I think I just saw a reference yesterday that McKinsey has come out with a report that's in August that is talking specifically about this great shift in innovation and creativity away from the U.S. And I really believe it. If you look at, we're graduating only about 1.2 million kids from college each year. Between India and China, it's 10 million. So just the sheer numbers of the fact that India and China, in the last 20 years, they have awakened from a slumber. I mean, if you remember back during the Cultural Revolution, all the intellectuals were being sent out to the farm to be retrained. And India was flirting with communism since their existence back in the 40s. So, and they finally came out of it in 91. And the Chinese began realizing that they needed to get more market-oriented in their economy back in '84, and they have been investing in education. And that's the one thing that this country has failed to do during Clinton administration, during Bush's administration. We're seeing a little bit more right now with Arne Duncan up at Secretary of Education. But I am concerned that we are not producing enough STEM kids that are interested in science and math. Somehow the computer games have turned our young boys off to technology for some reason. You'd think it'd be just the opposite. But we've got a very low interest in our K-12 about science, technology, and math. We've got to find some way to get more kids interested. We've got to find ways to get more than 65% of our kids graduating from high school. And if 35% are dropping out of high school, how in the hell are we going to compete in a global economy? Because these kids have got no skills. They can't even run a mechanized electronic press or anything because everything is computerized. You got, 25 or 30 computers under the hood of your car? You don't dare touch that unless you know what you're doing. So we've got to find ways to keep our kids in school, and to at least try to get them all graduated from high school, get them interested in STEM. We've got to work on our immigration policy where we when somebody walks across the stage with an engineering degree, a PhD in engineering, if they're from a foreign country, the immigration's waiting at the other end of the stage and say, hurry up and get out of the country. We don't want you here. I mean, in Canada and Australia, there's an immigration person stamping a green card when they come across the stage. That's what we have to do here. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So it's a shame that we've got some of the, even though our K-12s are some of the worst in the world, we rank like 17th or 18th behind almost every major country in Europe. We even fall behind Iceland. I mean, but
Well, when you get time with a policymaker, with a representative or a senator or Secretary Duncan, what do you say?
well, I'd like to talk to Arnie about putting more technology in the schools. We have worked at SAS on trying to develop content for grades 8 through 12 that is most suited to one-to-one computing, each child with a laptop and each teacher with a laptop. I know President Obama says, well, you know, there's been so many failures with technology, and that's because no one thought to work on the content for years and years ahead of time. No one thought about training the teachers on how to use that content in their classroom. And that's the kind of thing we've been working on for the last 12 years. And we don't charge anything. Our content is free of charge. We've got over 30,000 teachers in the U.S. now using it. So I very much believe that.
And you get to see how it works, because on your campus you have your own private school, the Carey School, correct?
Well, you can test curriculum pathways just by going to our website, and you can actually drill down onto any of the lessons yourself. Yeah, Carey Academy was built back in '95 with the idea that we wanted a school that had had fewer kids in the classroom, and every child had their own computer. So I just believe that the kids are so technology savvy, especially today. If you look at them with their iPods and cell phones and Facebook and MySpace and Xboxes and Nintendos and texting and all the instant messaging, all that kind of stuff that they have, that when they go to school they have to leave it behind. And I think that they get very bored in school because they're so used to this constant, instant communication they have with each other, and they have to leave that behind when they go to school. So I think the only solution is we've got to get schools into the 21st century. They're still teaching school the same way they did it when I was growing up. So nothing much has changed in the schooling. And the worst thing is nothing has changed in the colleges of education. At the universities, they're still teaching the way they taught 50 years ago, because that's how their professors learned.
But part of the problem is, though, the only reason we have education, that fifth year of education, is that there's a credential that doesn't really need to be a credential, which bars people, you know, from, I mean, now would be a great time during, when unemployment is so high, to let people, you know, come into the public school system with all the accumulated knowledge about the way the world really works, and be of inspiration to kids. But there's a barrier to doing that.
Well, there are some programs like Teach for America that are doing enough training to get them certified to teach.
Where can the United States economy play in a competitive global situation?
I think probably we're going to end up as a service economy, much like the UK has. Lots of bankers and insurance, and just, you know, selling things back and forth to each other. Flipping hamburgers.
Nothing more encouraging than that.
I don't see how we can possibly overcome just the vast numbers of scientists and engineers that we're going to be facing in Asia.
Okay, well, let's say you were 25 years old again, but it's 2009. Would you start a company? What would it be? Or would you move to China and India and try to figure that out?
Well, I'd probably be living at home with my mom and dad. I'd have to get their opinions. That reminds me, 2 years ago, we had all these young kids that talked about they were never going to work for any company for more than 2 years, and you know, they couldn't believe the parents that would work for the same company for all these years, and you know, boy, when they get out there in the workforce, they're never going to be locked down more than 2 years. Well, they're the ones that live at home over their parents, right? So that was funny.
But assuming you were not among the third of the unemployed, who are unemployed at age 25. I mean, would starting a company hold the same appeal?
I guess it depends what it's in. You know, I don't want to be too gloom and doom. We are seeing more Americans actually moving to China and getting jobs there because of their English skills, which are in high demand right now in China. We still have the greatest universities in the world here in the U.S. I think there's some Chinese professor that ranks them every year, and the only, you know, out of the top 20, I think there's 2 come from Europe, and they actually come from England. They're Oxford and Cambridge. Almost all of the European universities have been dumbed down because of their universal acceptance of students that come into them. So we still have the greatest universities here, and foreign students still come here to be trained. I just wish we would try to capture more of those people and not let them get away. This year's been a little bit easier because the H-1B visas we have like 20,000 openings for highly skilled PhDs, and they haven't quite all been used. So.
Well, looks like we're ready to go for Q&A for the audience, so fire away on the questions. This is a great opportunity, one of the great entrepreneurs, and you know, there aren't that many entrepreneurs who've gone the distance. That's what's, you know, there's Steve Jobs, and even he had an interruption. There's Larry Ellison, there's Michael Dell. Not a lot. Yes.
My name's Catherine Zhou with Accenture. Great admirer of SAS, and I'm personally a SAS programmer back many years ago. So you have refused to be bought, and you've refused to go public. So what's your take on the recent or not so recent event of IBM buying SPSS for $1.5 billion? Does that change your view of how the advanced analytics world work? And if it does, how does it change your impact?
Well, I could say if you can't afford the very best, you have to go for second or third place. Well, I think that we have certainly seen IBM's attempt to compete with us in the past fail on several occasions. They had a system called AS. It stood for, I can't remember what it even stood for, but it was a takeoff on SAS, and it was a statistical system that they tried to sell that for about 10 years and finally folded on that one. And then they have tried to compete against us with their intelligent miner. I don't even know if that product exists anymore because we own about 40% of the data mining market. We, I think, outsold in software terms SBS by 20 to 1 last year. So they're picking up a pretty small company, and we are not really scared of IBM. We've competed with them the whole history of our company. So it's, and they have also been selling SPSS for the last couple of years. So I hope that they will do to SPSS what so many other companies have done when they do an acquisition. They just completely devastate the organization they purchase. So we're pulling for them, you know.
Next question.
Hi, my name is George Komodo. I'm just reading about the corporate culture and hearing about, I'm just wondering, I guess, what would you do once you're, I guess, moving on from SAS? It sounds like you have a lot of fun and you really enjoy the company, but now you see like Bill Gates give away all his money, but what are your kind of plans for the future?
Well, you know, I have no plans on retiring or anything like that anytime soon. You know, we're going through some extremely exciting times with some of the new computing paradigms that we're working on. We have, you know, our markets continue to grow. The demand for the type of software that we produce is also growing. I think the analytics is something that's in play right now. I think we've got numerous authors, Tom Davenport, there's about 5 or 6 others that have been talking about the importance of analytics in business now for some time. So, I mean, even Microsoft is offering analytics now, right? So, there you go. Aren't you scared about IBM's purchase of SPSS? Well, I don't know why they asked me that question. Why do they ask Microsoft? Oh, are you guys shaking now?
Yes.
MIT. You mentioned this this many-core thing where it looks like the good old microprocessor manufacturer knows how to make just one thing in the future, and that is more cores because they can't figure out how to up the frequency. So everybody else says, revolution, revolution, this is going to revolutionize everything. Do you see that little tsunami coming and affecting your business?
Well, no, we're leading that.
Okay. So you program just the way you used to, or you got some secret sauce?
We have a lot of new secret sauce. You're exactly right. We're not going to see any great speed increases in chips until they get through the they're at the upper end of ultraviolet already, trying to etch these things, and much further there'll be X-ray in them instead. So.
Transistors on edge is their
Yeah, all right. So adding cores is a logical thing, but how do you take advantage of multiple cores, and are you ready to rethink how you've been programming things? And we've been playing with this stuff for about 6 years now, and we have multi-threaded almost our entire line of products are multi-threaded, so we can take advantage of multiple cores.
Some of the operating systems aren't cooperating very well in that.
Well, we tend to use Linux on ours for the most part.
Multiple hands up, so next question.
Hi, it's a pleasure. For a long time I wanted to learn SaaS and its products, but it's not until I went into a large corporation that who actually had it, and that I could start using it. And it was sort of astounding. It's like you can't get a job doing SaaS unless you've used SaaS, right? And so I noticed that you have a smaller scale product that people can download and fool with. But still, one of the biggest barriers I find is just training. I mean, your documentation is outrageous, outrageously good. But it just seems everything around training is expensive. It's like, oh, you want to go learn how to use SaaS Enterprise Miner? Oh, sure, it'll be, I don't know what it is, $800 for 4 days or something. So I'm wondering, why don't you just open the floodgates and give training away, make free webcasts and things like this that because SaaS programmers make so much money because there's so few of them, right? And that's not good for you because you want to sell the software, you want to sell the products and the services. So I was just wondering, why you throw in all these barriers, these 70s era barriers to getting people smart on your systems?
What company do you work for?
So what I do right now is I actually work with small companies who, I wouldn't even mention SaaS because it's just too expensive. So I'm trying to leverage a lot of open source solutions, and they can't handle the volume of data, of course, that SaaS can. But there's all these little point solutions. For example, R, or Weka, or Pentaho, all these open source solutions. And what it takes is people who can get smart on it. And since it's open source, I can download it myself and I can get smart on it. You see?
Can you download an education course?
Well, actually, now that you mention it, there are many courses in statistics and such, and data mining and such, that you can find on the web.
Okay.
But my point is that there's such a dearth of SaaS-trained statisticians that they're willing to talk to people who only have PhDs in other physical sciences and engineering.
Well, there are a number of online courses at SAS. I think if you just come to our website and check out some of the on-site stuff under education, that would be my best suggestion to you.
Hi, I just wanted to see if you'd like to comment on any interesting architectural innovations on the hardware side that you're looking at.
I'm not familiar with a lot of late. You know, I'm not a hardware person myself. I'm an applications developer. You know, the only thing I want to know about an operating system is how do I use the editor? How do I submit a job? How do I test it? How do I compile it? That sort of thing. So usually that can be handed to me on one sheet of paper that tells me how to use the operating system. I gave up on operating systems when the IBM 360 first came out. And, you know, operating systems have been sort of an impediment to get at the real hardware ever since. I mean, there's nothing better. I mean, you know, I grew up on an IBM 1620. It was a base 10 machine. You had a button on the console that you pressed that says load the first card into location 0 through 79, then branch to location 0 and start executing the instruction that you find there. And that's how everything always started. Press the load button, and you had to then figure out how to load the rest of your program in. So, but that was back in the good old days when computers were base 10. You could actually look at a dump and understand it, you know, if you had to. So,
my name is Marcus Fromhertz from PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. I'm wondering whether you and your team also work only 45 hours per week or less. And if so, what can you say a little bit about the governance and management structure that you have in place that allows you to do that?
well, I guess it really starts with me, and that's the example I set. I'm usually out of there about 5 o'clock every day. I usually get in at 9 and take an hour off for lunch downstairs. Well, sometimes if I'm eating in the cafeteria, it's only maybe 30 minutes for lunch. But most of the people around me are, keep the same kind of hours, and I certainly encourage that. I mean, sometimes you're deep in a project, and I know you can't quite leave or something, or you feel like you want to come back on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and work for a few hours. But when I was growing up, we actually had to come back at night because we only got one turnaround a day. You put your card deck into the computing center, and it got read and sent to another computer out in the triangle, and you had to wait in line with hundreds of other people waiting to get their jobs run one at a time sequentially. And then, so we would always come back after dinner to see if our job had returned, so we could then mark it up and make some changes and then submit it again so it would be ready again the next morning, so we could get 2 turnarounds a day. Today, compiles and things are just so instantaneous. You finish typing your last line, you hit submit, boom, it compiles. Got no errors? Fine, you're finished. Turn it over to testing. Back in my day, we had to take our card deck, and before we even submit it, we would get a printout on an offline machine. You could just walk up and print your card deck out on a printer. And we would go back and sit down at our desk and actually go through it line by line, convincing ourselves that this is going to work, or this is correct. And the kids these days don't do that. They just assume anything they write is going to be correct, and they submit it. You've used some of Microsoft's software. You know how it is.
No, let me just add, though. I mean, you not about Microsoft, but this 9 to 5 stuff, Jim, I mean, you're on the road, what, half the time? I mean, that's when you're in Cary, but you travel the world, having to contend with different time zones, talking to customers around the world, employees around the world. It's not quite as neat as 9 to 5.
Well, it's not a whole lot different, except a lot of the trips in the U.S. are just day trips. I mean, I've done speaking engagements out here on the West Coast, and what I usually will try to schedule them like between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, and I can fly out here and do that and be home. About a 12-hour turnaround. But this was at night, so I want to spend the night here. But no, it's I'm not on the road, but about maybe one day a week, probably average, something like that. It's not a lot.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Josh Lee, and I work at Google. And I would love to hear more about how you encourage innovation at SAS.
Well, innovation is something that I quite often try to get involved in myself. Some of these, I was talking about sitting down at the beach, for example, out on my back deck watching the ocean roll in, and a glass of wine or two, and I kept looking at these waves rolling in through the spokes of the railing, and these waves would roll in, and these spokes in the railing made me start thinking about how to do linear programming.
Was there more than wine involved in?
Hell, I've had some of my best ideas after 3 or 4 glasses of wine. So anyway, when I came back, I started talking about how to, use these multiple core machines and threading to break some of these huge linear programming problems down in where you're actually doing row operations and doing those on columns. The columns were the columns in the fence. And that got us going on some of this. But innovation is, it comes from all levels of the company. People are encouraged to do it. What at Google, y'all got a special day you're supposed to sit and innovate or something? I'm not sure how that works, because I think a lot of innovation is sort of spontaneous. It comes to you at strange times, while you're driving home or something like that. But basically, we will try something, and typically once we get the idea, and quite often the idea actually comes from customers. But we always go out and try to find a customer that will work with us on new ideas, because we want to make sure if we can meet that customer's needs, then we feel like we can meet the needs of others as well. So that's
Next question.
Jim, with the analytics and business intelligence market maturing and consolidating, could you please comment on where you see some of the new areas of innovation, rather either generally or specifically?
Well, there's so many ideas that are hatched and pop up about web and web advertising and web collection of data. It's just it just boggles the mind, all the stuff that keeps popping up. And as far as new data analysis or analytic companies, they spring up all the time. 3 or 4 guys with an idea for some special kind of optimization that nobody else is doing. They find a couple of customers to sell it to, and they get some reference accounts, and it goes on from there. So I don't think there's any difficulty in startups. I think we will continue to have large numbers of young startup companies. It's just the question is, can they get the visibility and find enough people to believe in them to actually buy their product or to invest in them.
Hi, my name is Karen. So I'd like to travel back like 30 plus years, and
Gosh, I would too. That'd be great. Wow.
And maybe you can elaborate, or maybe let us know if you had any mentor at the time, and maybe recall any best advice you had just to navigate the business environment or challenges. And a second question, do you have any mentor or coach right now?
No, I never had a mentor. I guess I grew up in business. I was working in my dad's hardware store when I was starting from the age of 12, so I've worked since I was 12 years old, and put my way mostly through college and master's and PhD, paid my way through there. So I've always worked, and I guess I learned some basic skills from my dad, who said, the next time somebody comes in here and you don't ask them how their appliance is working, because they'll always find a problem, and you'll have to then go out and fix it. So that's an interesting, because I was young. I'd just, been delivering the appliances there for a while, and couldn't wait to ask this customer how things were working. And oh, well, there's this hinge that's a little squeaky. So I had to go out and fix it. So I learned my lesson right there. You know, don't ask too many questions. But no, I have I guess, you know, the only thing I look back at a few teachers in high school and maybe one or two in college that, you know, I admired, but I've never really had a mentor. And I don't read many business books either. It's because I get at least one a week on my desk that somebody's sending me, and I just cannot possibly read all those things. I have a big pile, and when it gets up about 25 high, I send it over to our library. They have to figure out what to do with them.
Yes.
Jim, I had two questions. One is, what drives you? Is it just pure love of science, or customers, or your employees, or competition? And based on that answer, how would you then make sure that the stakeholders, how would you take care of them after, God forbid,
after I go on to the great beyond?
Succession,
You know, I don't think I'll give a damn then. That reminds me of the story. You've heard this story about the Pope and Bill Clinton?
No.
It happens they die on the same date, and there was some mix-up, and Bill ends up in heaven, and the Pope ends up in hell. And about 2 days later, Michael at the pearly gates guy, he figures out, oh, there's been a problem here, so he summons Bill back up there, and he says, well, you've got to go down there. And he contacted down there, and they sent the Pope up, and they sent Bill down. They met about halfway, and the Pope says, oh, I'm so happy I'm going to heaven. I can't wait to see the Virgin Mary. And Bill says, oh, you're a day late, sorry.
Well, that's a first. It's a club first. Mark, who's the club historian? That's a good one. Yes.
Hi, my name is Chetan Patwardhan with Strategent. I'm also a good acquaintance of Keith Collins. I run a company here in San Mateo, 25 people growing, bootstrapped, now profitable. What advice do you have for people like me, entrepreneurs, who want to build companies like SAS, profitable on our own, without the mercy of money from outside and the fear of acquisitions? And most important, how do I attract and retain talent when everybody around me is issuing stock options and showing the dreams of either acquisitions or an IPO in a few years?
Well, I think the one thing I've always believed in is that if you treat people like they're going to make a difference, then they will make a difference. And you think about that a little bit. You want to treat people that work for you the way you want to be treated. The golden rule kind of thing, whatever. But it's a lot of truth in that. You've got to have the faith that the people are going to be doing the right thing most of the time for you, that they're going to be doing it for the company and for the benefits of the company. So that's always worked well for us. We did a survey a couple of years ago, and 87% of the people at SAS say they don't want the company to ever go public. So, I don't know what you do out here with everybody thinking about stock options. It must be a tough environment to live in. But it's just like I did for my people this year. I would say that we will not have any layoffs because we're not a public company. We don't have the stock options or anything like that. We can do that, but if we were public, we would have probably wanted to lay some people off and take advantage of the opportunity and say, well, let's do it. Now, I guess one of the things that really bothers me about public companies that make these layoff announcements is their stock typically goes up the next day. And I find that to be the most incredible thing, that here the management are admitting that they don't know what the hell they're doing. They're way over their heads, and their stock goes up. It's beyond my understanding how that works.
Next question.
Good evening. Thank you for the very entertaining talk and the bold statements, even though Daniel's in the front. I had a quick question about like the management style you had for engineers, because you said you're an engineer yourself. How do you apply that, or do you apply that to the business side of things, like sales and marketing, and if so, do you make any variations on that?
Well, of course, you know, sales is about the only part of the business that you can actually measure the individual contributions to. It's very difficult on the R&D side, because I've never found a good measurement for R&D. How do you know somebody is really good, other than the fact that they're producing a lot of code and it's all good? And you know, if you measure the lines of code, then you're going to get a lot of lines of code. If you measure the fewest bugs, then you're not going to get a lot of lines of code, because they're going to be laying low and trying not to write anything. You know, so if you're measuring lines of code, there's going to be a lot of comments added. So, but the salespeople you can measure. You give them a target, and they either make it or they don't. And you know, if they don't make it, you know, 2 years in a row, then they pretty much know it's time for them to leave, and they'll leave on their own. So. And so you see a lot of salespeople resumes that work for companies for 2 years. Then they go to the next company and work 2 more years. So measuring people's productivity is a very difficult thing. I've never found a successful way to do it other than for salespeople. Marketing people, well, what do they do anyway? They're always marketing something that the salespeople don't know anything about. I've tried to explain to marketing and sales, you know, you people ought to try to work together. You know, let marketing promote the things you're going to sell, and vice versa. I think everybody has that problem.
Next question.
Yeah, James Taylor. So Jim, are there problems you've thought about trying to solve in the past that you've only recently been able to really start making some traction on? And what kind of problems are they? What's new in the category of things we can now do in a way that makes sense for people that didn't used to be true?
Well, when we first started, I guess, you know, one of the great leaps forward is when computers went from 64K to 128. I guess the micros started like that. Didn't they start at 64 or something like that? Yeah. So that was, and back in the early days of computing, everything was memory constrained, and all of your algorithms had to be concentrated on using a very small amount of memory, keeping a lot of stuff out on the disk because you didn't have any room in memory. But now that memory's gotten so cheap, and you know, I just ordered a rack of blades. Each blade has got 32 gigabytes of memory on the blade itself. You know, so you need to rethink some of the way you've been computing stuff. That memory is cheap. There's a lot of it. It's almost infinitely addressable. The amount of data that we can process now, the size of the problems, are vastly, thousands of times bigger than they were back when we first started. And you've got to learn to adapt. You can't use the same old algorithms over that you've been using. You've got to use more memory. Think about how to take advantage of memory. It's so fast compared to trying to save something to disk. And it creates whole new paradigms of the way to think about trying to keep more and more of your data in memory, trying to keep intermediate results in memory. So, you know, those are some of the fun things that we're working on right now.
Seeing deep patterns in business through data mining is something that would have, the stuff that we take for granted today in business, you know, is made possible by all these advances. What big business problems do you think we'll be solving in 5, 10, and 20 years that look unimaginably difficult today?
Well, some of the stuff we're doing right now that's still taking a lot of time are things in the retail sector, like like markdown optimization. Here we have let's take a store like Kohl's, retailer. I think they've got 850 or so stores, and it's getting near the end of the season, and they don't want to say that they have no back room to put leftover merchandise in. It's got to be sold. So how do you get all of the thousands of SKUs of material out the door before the end of the season and still maximize your profit? These are problems that we know how to solve these problems with algorithms that we have, and some of the linear and nonlinear programming and some of the forecasting algorithms that we have. It's just the type of problem that no one could have possibly thought was possible to even solve just a few years ago.
Well, on that, before I go to the next question, quickly touch on what are the healthcare problems. Since you started out with NIH money, you've been, I know you do work with biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies, helping them speed up the drug delivery process. What big strides can be made there with statistical analysis?
Well, first of all, we certainly want to see some kind of a national health database, or at least some regional ones that where people's medical records are moved into these vast depositories to make them more accessible to the doctors that you're seeing or talking about. But at the same time, that would give us the opportunity to be searching constantly for patterns of disease in certain areas, side effects that no one else has even seen, or drug reactions that are causing side effects. It would be wonderful if we had all that data together. I think with the healthcare bill looking like it's probably going to pass, well, it depends on the Senate, of course, and what kind of compromise they're working on, but they've got restrictions in there that allow for pre-existing, you can't screen on pre-existing conditions. And that's been one of the big arguments for security of your health records in the past, as they were afraid some of these companies would get a hold of them and be able to use that to prevent people from getting jobs. So I've never really been worried about healthcare record security. You know, how secure is your records now? They're in a manila folder in a doctor's filing cabinet. I mean, scattered all over town. So if anybody really wanted to find out about it, they just have to go break into that particular doctor's office and pick your records up. So I've never been much of a believer in this security issue over why we shouldn't store stuff on a computer somewhere. At least, you know, if the doctor's office gets flooded or burned out, there's a copy of the record. And every time you go into a new doctor's office, you don't have to fill out 2 pages of forms. So I think it'd be great to have that. That's going to take a lot of work, though, to try to get all the hospitals and all the individual doctors' offices hooked up into using a single medical record system. It's an enormous amount of work.
Well, we're testing the limits of your East Coast hours here, so we'll take a couple. I see we have 2 more questions. Why don't we make these the last 2?
What do you feel is the right ratio of managers to programmers in R&D?
8. No. No, I think one of the problems you do see in R&D is too much management creep, where you've got one manager every 3 or 4 people. I still like the 8 programmers per manager type ratio. Now, if you need to have some little sub teams with project leaders, that's fine. So we're doing more, I'd say, more interdisciplinary, where we're taking people from whole, 3 or 4 different areas and pulling them together to work without much of a manager at all. So.
And this one.
Jim, if you want to speak about it, what was by far the worst decision you made in your tenure at SAS, if you wish to speak about it, and how did you handle it? How did everybody else handle it within the company?
Well, I guess probably some of the investments. We bought an airline from Sam Zell. It's called Midway, and that went down in 2001, went bankrupt, and so we lost all our money. You know, of course, we've been smart. We'd have bought some Microsoft stock in the very early days. I mean, there's a lot of things you look back on. I tell you, one of the principles that I try to talk about a lot is the fact that it's okay to make mistakes, and you've got to have a culture that accepts mistakes. And I can make the biggest of mistakes of anybody else in the company because I've got the biggest purse strings. And what I try to tell people is it's okay to innovate, it's try new things, but once you start digging a hole, and that hole keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're spending more and more money because you really believe it's going to work, at some point you've got to come to the realization it's time to get out and stop digging that hole so damn deep. Move over and start another smaller hole. They're cheaper. And that's something you just have to remember. You got to know when to let go of a bad situation that's just not going to get any better, and just take your losses. You've already lost the money. Just go on about it and start something else. That's a hard one for people to do. Give up and let go of something they believe in so much.
The sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
Let's give Dr. Goodnight a big hand.
Sure.
Well, all I can say is we don't own any airplanes at Microsoft.
I can't believe that. What are you doing making cell phone operating system? What, do you have to reboot after every phone call? Or?
There you go. Touche. Oh, my goodness. Well, Rich and Jim, on behalf of the Churchill Club, thank you so much for an incredibly entertaining program. Rich, you were terrific, and Dr. Goodnight, what more can we say than good night? And offer you a terrific T-shirt from the Churchill Club. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks again to HP and staff for sponsoring the program.